Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Double Play podcast. I'm back from vacation, and we're going to talk about the All-Star rosters that dropped yesterday, as well as a standings update to kind of regain our sense of what's going on in Major League Baseball. But without further ado, let's get into it.
Hello, everybody. We are back today. The All-Star Game rosters have just dropped. That was just yesterday, but I'm excited. All-Star Game is happening almost at the midway point of the season. Jack, what do you think about the rosters?
Well, first of all, I think I would give your Gritty at least a 9 out of 10. That was kind of fire. I'm sure it sounds good with the song. The All-Star rosters are an interesting concept, and I say interesting, and I mean bad. I think that you and I were both pretty disappointed when the All-Star rosters dropped yesterday. With the starters, obviously, there's fan voting, so you're going to get some mix-ups. Some of the more popular players are going to get on there when I think they shouldn't, like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. starting over Ty France. And then you assume that the second part, when they build out the benches, that's when the players who really deserve it are going to, get paid their dues. They're going to be recognized for how well they've been playing. But that still disappointed us as well. So, just as an example, Ty France doesn't get the start over Vlad Guerrero Jr. Fan voting can be a popularity contest, but now he's also not going to be on the bench. He didn't even make the All-Star team. That kind of stuff is disappointing. So we put out a tweet yesterday about our biggest All-Star Game snubs. We can kind of go one by one, or I can list them all off and then we can talk about them. But first of all, it starts with Ty France. Both of you and I had him starting the All-Star Game. He doesn't make the roster. He's been injured, but he still played over 70 games so far. He's been hitting better than I think Luis Ariz and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Just disappointing that a guy who's maybe been one of the better players, better hitters in baseball, doesn't make the All-Star team, especially when he's on a team like the Mariners, and he's still been producing all year. Then Carlos Rodon, Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola, a couple pitchers in the National League that it's just surprising to see left off that list. Rodon leads the National League pitchers in WAR, has the best FIP in the National League, fresh off a complete game, one-run game against the San Diego Padres. We also got Dylan Cease, Kevin Gausman as some pitchers in the American League, and then we can figure out the back half of that list. But those are kind of, I think, the big marquee names, guys that were left off. Where do you want to start? Because there were a lot of snubs this year.
I think, just in the American League, I think the biggest, I don't want to say problem, but I think fix that can be made to the American League is, I think Shohei shouldn't be taking up 2 spots there. He got the starting DH as well as voted in as a starting pitcher, which then he's already an All-Star, and then that takes away from a Dylan Cease or a Kevin Gausman who could have then been an All-Star. And I get it's like, oh, well, he was an All-Star hitter as well as an All-Star pitcher, so I recognize him in 2 spots. But, it takes away from another guy who also deserved it. And, I think Dylan Cease is the biggest name for me in the AL, or a biggest pitcher name in the AL that should have been on there for me. He's had an incredible season so far, and I think he should have been an All-Star. And, you talked about Ty France. He deserved to be there as well. And those are, the 2 biggest names, I think, in the AL. Because, you can go down the list, and what we do is, we list off all these guys who have been putting up All-Star caliber seasons. But, the reality is not all of them can make it. But in these cases, these are guys that are better than some of the names that are on there. So they should have made it. Like I said, there are guys that might be left off, but that has to happen. But these guys were kind of truly snubbed.
Well, and I think if you ask Shohei, you're like, okay, you're already an All-Star. Do you want to take up 2 spots, or you want to take up 1 spot and let someone else also make the roster? I think we could all tell from the way Shohei behaves in his personality. He wants to see other people represented. I'm pretty sure everyone in baseball would rather take up 1 spot than 2 so that, all of the guys that they play with and compete against get a chance to be on the All-Star roster. And, Cease, I don't think I actually found a way to get him on my roster, but when we saw the actual ones get dropped and you see Nestor Cortez in there over Cease, obviously Martin Perez is there too. He's the only Ranger on the team, but there's definitely some American League pitchers that I wouldn't have put over Dylan Cease, and there are definitely American League hitters I wouldn't have put over Ty France, who you and I had starting the game. Again, there's a chance that some of these guys get voted in late or added on if players are injured or starting pitchers can't pitch. That's fingers crossed for Cease to be able to make it on the team. If one guy can't pitch, he'll get the reins as an All-Star. But also in the National League, we had 3 pitchers, I think, that all had All-Star game cases. 2 of them in Wheeler and Rodon, I think absolutely should have been All-Stars. And then you can also make the case for Aaron Nola. What do you think about those 3 National League pitchers?
I think Rodon is the biggest one. I was thinking about it. What I kind of came to is I think Tyler Stevenson should have been the Reds over d'Arnaud as the backup catcher, and then Rodon should have got there over Luis Castillo, who hasn't been all that great. Even started the season late, missed a handful of starts, and Rodon has been better than Castillo, and I know Castillo was the Reds one, but I think even Brandon Drury as a reserve could have been the Reds. I think Brandon Drury you could talk about as a snub just in general, not just being as the Reds representative. So I think Rodon is the biggest one, but I mean, National League pitching has been wonderful, and I think the ERA was, when comparison of the starters in the NL that made the All-Star team, I think their ERA is like a 2.1, 2.2. So I mean, the pitching in the NL has been loaded. So like we said, there's some guys like Nola, Wheeler, I think maybe they had to be left off, as much as it sucks because they've been so great. But I think Rodon was the guy who's like truly a snub and definitely should have been there.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it feels like, to me, there was kind of a low number of starting pitchers in the National League, too. I think they only put 7 in. And I don't know why. It just felt a little small considering when we made our rosters. But yeah, I think Rodon should have been in there. Yes, Castillo had to be a Reds rep. I think you're right. Brandon Drury, maybe even better than Tyler Stevenson, could have been on that roster, and then put in one more starting pitcher. I also think, Rodon's been better than Max Fried so far this year. We can get into your thoughts about Brian Snitker being the manager and some of the Braves that made the team, but I think that there were other ways to configure the roster. Rodon's number 1 in WAR in the National League among pitchers. Kevin Gausman number 1 in WAR among AL pitchers, and both those guys don't make the All-Star roster. Cease is up there too, so it's interesting. I never really liked the way they put together All-Star rosters. You and I had a discussion yesterday about whether Clayton Kershaw deserves to be there over some of these other guys, considering he's thrown 40 less innings than Rodon, 50 plus less innings than Nola. I think it's like 35 less innings than Zach Wheeler. Of course, the game's in LA, so he is pitching at an all-star level when he's on the field, but considering that he's been on the field for what would amount to like 4 or 5 nearly less games than these other pitchers, if they're pitching 8 or 9 innings, it's an interesting discussion, and one that maybe we should have here as well.
Yeah, one thing I want to touch on real quick. You mentioned there was less starters, it seemed like, in the NL. That's because when we did our list, we had however many starters and only 3 relievers. The NL has 5 relievers, so that takes away from 2 guys, 2 more spots potentially starting pitching that would have gotten in years past. That because we based it off kind of years past what the rosters have looked like. And, maybe there's stronger relievers this year, but with Kershaw though. I'm biased, so he deserves to be there. I think in the less innings you can talk about, but I think there's a point where you draw the line, because maybe not Rodon as substantial, but between Wheeler and Nola, Kershaw's been noticeably, not significantly, but noticeably better in terms of stat wise, and so and still has enough innings. Like, it's not like he's only made 3 or 4 starts and had just a few good starts and he's looked like vintage Kershaw. Like, he's put together a great season and just missed a couple starts. So I just think there's got to be a point where you draw the line between a guy who's been better but less innings than a guy who's been worse but more innings. So and like Rodon there, it's kind of give or take stats wise. Kershaw's better in some, Rodon's better in others. So maybe a guy like that, you could put Rodon over him. But yeah, I definitely think the All-Star game being in LA had something to do with it.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that Kershaw doesn't deserve to be an All-Star. I just think in years like this where you see these three guys, or even if you don't want to include Nola or Wheeler, like guys that are left off the team that we all agree should be all-stars, and then you see Kershaw with the less innings making it over them, I think that's when it stings a little bit more. That's when the discussion should be maybe a little bit louder. Let's go over some other snubs. We had Tommy Edman in the National League, one of the highest or the most valuable players playing offensively and defensively in the NL. We already mentioned Brandon Drury, Will Smith, who I know that one kind of rubbed you the wrong way with d'Arnaud making it over Smith. Also then Josh Bell and Freddie Freeman, tough for the NL first baseman. But yeah, those are some other snubs. Of course, there were more, but you can't mention every single one. I mean, I think Taylor Ward's a guy that we were like, yeah, he's kind of snubbed as well. But again, these rosters, you're taking an entire league and combining it into two teams. So some people are going to get left off, but these are the ones that kind of stung the most.
Yeah, I think the majority of those guys, I was upset about Will Smith not making over d'Arnaud. Will Smith has been, when you go down the list of stats, Will Smith is leading in the majority, if not almost all of them. So I was upset about that one as a Dodger fan because, Will Smith has been kind of widely considered a top 2 or 3 catcher in Major League Baseball the last few years and has yet to be an all-star. So I wanted him to have an all-star appearance, and the other guys, I mean, yeah, the majority of them are guys that maybe would make it in years past, but I mean, it's a good team, and some guys are just naturally going to be left off, like you said. And I mean, we've focused on all the snubs, but at the end of the day, it's exciting for all these all-stars. There's a lot of first-year all-stars this season, which is good to see. And I mean, we focused on the negative guys that should be there, but it's also exciting for the guys that are there.
Yeah, to kind of round it out, if you want to go see what we deemed to be the perfect all-star rosters 2 weeks ago in an episode, you can go to our page. I'll link it right here as well up in the top corner. That's we researched, we put our own rosters together. Those are the guys that we think are deserving of being on the team. But also, you're right, congratulations to all of the first-time All-Stars, all the guys who were there for the umpteenth time. You got Albert Pujols, possibly could even be making a start at DH. Miguel Cabrera in the AL, as those are the 2 commissioner votes in. So good to see all these players getting represented. Just wish, it worked out perfectly. But then again, as you mentioned, such small rosters for such a big league, it's hard to get everyone there and everyone who deserves it. But that's kind of enough for the All-Star snubs. Let's move on to a standings update and get into what's been going on in baseball since we last looked at the standings. Let's start in the National League West. Dodgers still in first place as you would expect. They're 56-29, and then a little bit of a drop-off with the Padres and Giants struggling recently. The Padres 49-38, 8 games back, and the Giants all the way down 43-41, 12.5 games back. And now the Diamondbacks have tied actually with the Rockies 38-48. They're out of contention 18.5 games back. But that top 3 has really been shaken up since the last time we looked at it after the Giants had swept the Dodgers and all 3 teams were close. Now the Dodgers have a sizable lead over both teams. Giants been struggling recently, only a couple games over 500.
Yeah, the Dodgers, I mean, they're 9-1 in their last 10. I think they just went 10-1 on a homestand, with their only loss being a late inning blown lead to the Padres, which they could have a big win streak here. But I mean, they still won 7 in a row, and you couple that with both the Giants and the Padres going 3-7 in the last 10. Yeah. Now the lead's a little bit more substantial, and I mean, the team I really want to talk about is your Giants. They now sit 2 games back of the final wild card spot. So on paper, they're still in contention, still in the hunt. But I mean, they're cold, so we look in a few weeks that might be a little larger if they can't turn this around. And so my question is to you is, I mean, should they still be making a playoff push here, and should they look to buy a big piece of the deadline?
So they've been colder. That's what I'll say. They've been colder. They were on an absolutely terrible streak. Like, it physically was hurting me to keep watching the games. Some games I was just like, I'm not sitting through this anymore. They've had arguably the worst defense in baseball. Like, for some reason, they boot balls, they throw balls away, pass balls, wild pitches. It's like, it doesn't look like the kind of baseball that a team that builds their roster this way, where they don't have the big names. It's kind of shocking to see them play this poorly in the field, and then they've gone through a kind of a cold streak hitting. But the last 2 games, Rodon went CG against the Padres, and then yesterday the hit parade came out. I think they had over 17 hits, and they ended up winning that game big over San Diego, and it was a shutout, I think 12-0. They hadn't had a 10-hit or more game since the last game they played against Atlanta in a series they lost 3 of 4 games, including 2 of them on walk-offs. So they've had a tough week. I'm trying to get back to see, like, at the worst point of the streak, how bad was it? But I think they had won 3 of their last 12, or it could have been even worse. They've had to make some roster changes. Yermin Mercedes coming to the team. They've been dealing with a lot of injuries. Crawford went down, then Estrada went on the COVID IL, even though he didn't even have COVID. Now Lestella's on the COVID IL. They've been battling injuries with Lamont Wade and Evan Longoria and Luis Gonzalez, but they're patching it together. They've had to work in a lot of bullpen games. They've made some trades to bring in potential starting pitchers because DeSclafani is out for the year now, and they're really down to 4 starters because Junis is also on the IL. But I think that they are hoping that they're making a turnaround after these 2 games that they beat San Diego in. They get Arizona for what seems like a 3rd straight series. They've been playing Arizona a lot lately. They get Arizona starting today and the next couple of days in Oracle Park. I think that's a big series to see whether the momentum that they got in those last 2 games against San Diego is going to turn around and whether they can start to win some of these games against the bad teams, which is something they haven't been very good at this year. They've lost the season series to the Reds. They split 1 of 2 versus the Tigers. They got swept by the White Sox, and they've already lost more games to the Diamondbacks this year than they did all of last year. I think, though, they can still be a contender, but we're really going to see what kind of baseball they are going to play ahead of the deadline. I think that'll be a big decision maker for Farhan Zaidi about where this team is headed.
I think they are still contenders for a playoff position, and however, I don't think they should be looking to make a big buy at the deadline. I think their ceiling is sneaking into a playoff team. I don't know if I see. I mean, you mentioned the lack of starting pitching depth, and I think just depth in general is kind of where we've seen the Giants struggle. Last year they were healthy and getting production from everyone. This year, I mean, you're not seeing the health bug is kind of getting to them. So I mean, and that's kind of where they struggle. They struggle with the lack of depth a little bit, and I think if you go out and make a big trade, you're gonna kind of hurt your depth even more. And so I think they should. I think you will see a turnaround once they get healthy a bit more, but I don't think they should go selling the farm to go get a big piece and try and make a run this season.
Yeah, one thing that has been raised is the idea of trading Carlos Rodon. He's got an opt-out after this year. If they don't make the playoffs, people are worried that Rodon, who, as we mentioned, probably should be an all-star so far this season, one of the more valuable pitchers in the National League, people fear that he will opt out of his Giants contract, won't return for that second year that they signed him to. So if the Giants are struggling, do you look to trade Carlos Rodon? Do you look to trade Brandon Belt, who has been one of your more productive hitters over the past couple of years? Honestly, one of the more productive hitters in the National League. If you look at WRC Plus and a couple other stats, do they trade other guys in their system like Evan Longoria, Brandon Crawford, just to get the age off the roster? Definitely something that Giants fans would be pretty sad about. If Brandon Belt was traded, I don't know what I would do, but I don't think that they're going to go out and sell. I think you're right about that. But I also don't know how much they're going to want to go out and buy. And specifically, I don't know what they would do if they go out and buy, because I don't know how many players are really going to be on the market this trade deadline. If it's a guy like Andrew Benintendi, does he fit into the Giants roster, and would Farhan want to make that kind of move? When you list off all the guys that they have to potentially play outfield, and Jock, Yastrzemski, Lamont Wade, Luis Gonzalez, Darren Ruff has played outfield. They've got Yermin Mercedes playing a little bit of left field. Like, do you just wait for your guys to get healthy, or do you make the push and try and get extra bats, extra pitching? I think maybe they make a trade for a little bit of pitching depth as in a starting pitcher role. But earlier in the year, I was thinking Wilson Contreras, but they're getting league average output from the catcher position, which is shocking to me considering they're rolling out Kurt Casale, Joey Bart, and Austin Wynns, which I don't think blows anyone's mind at the catcher position. But I think that they're not going to be huge buyers, but I don't think they sell, and I think they just kind of try and ride the wave of the momentum, get players healthy, and I think they find their way a little bit, because I don't think the defense will be this bad for the rest of the season. I don't think the bullpen will struggle as much as it has at times. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. Those 2 games in San Diego, though, definitely helped.
Yeah, the the trade market seems like it's just a lot less of star-studded names than last year. Last year you saw Trey Turner and Max Scherzer get moved. You don't really have that this year. And no disrespect to the Wilson Contreras or Benintendi, but yeah, I mean, there's not really a huge name that is kind of like there's guys that'll push a contending team over the edge, but there's not a team that or a player that turns a playoff team into a World Series team really out there. So, I mean, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what all teams do, and I think if they don't turn around soon, I think it would maybe be smart for them to sell, but it'll be interesting to see what they do in the next few weeks headed up to the trade deadline. But yeah, that kind of wraps it up for the NL West. Moving into the NL Central. Recently, it's been kind of business as usual here in the Central. I mean, Brewers still lead by 2.5 games over the Cardinals. Brewers at 48-39, while the Cardinals are 46-42. And then the Pirates are in third, 11.5 back at 36-50. Cubs 34-52, 13.5 back, and then the Reds 32-54, 15.5 back. And I mean, you look at kind of the trends recently in the last 10, they're all pretty close. The Cardinals have faltered a little bit, but they're still keeping pace, whereas they're 3-7 in the last 10. The Brewers are 4-6. So they're all kind of in that 5-5-ish range, give or take a few games. So I mean, I mean, this is just a division. We haven't seen much change this year, and it's kind of going to plan. And I think the biggest thing is we thought the Cardinals would be in a playoff spot, or they're only one game back. We kind of thought it would be the Cardinals or Giants, whereas it's the Phillies right now, which we'll get to. But yeah, there's no really big surprise in the Central.
No, I think that, I mean, all the teams are struggling. I think we expected this to be the weakest division, most likely in all of baseball, and I think it has been. The Cardinals, I think we're starting to maybe see the faults of their roster coming up a little bit, where they're 3-7 in their last 10. I feel like the lack of pitching is kind of catching up with them a little bit. But then you look at the Brewers on the flip side, I think this is not what we expected, because it's been the bullpen that's been struggling recently. We had Josh Hader blowing a couple saves, getting a couple losses, which I don't think we've seen that pretty much over the last 3 or 4 years. And they're 4-6 in their last 10 as well. So it's really just those two teams in the Central. My guess, if I had to make one right now, is there's only one playoff team in that division. It's whoever wins it. Right now, the Brewers, like we mentioned, have that 2.5 game lead. And I think, as we mentioned preseason, their roster, I believe, is a little bit stronger than the Cardinals, because the Cardinals aren't hitting the covers off the ball with Arenado and Goldschmidt and Edman and O'Neill and all those guys. If they're not just putting up 8 to 10 runs a game, their pitching might catch up with them. I think that's what we've been seeing, and I think that if that continues, the Brewers probably have the best shot to win it. But right now, I think, as we've seen pretty much every month, they're both right up there at the top, and there hasn't been much changes going on.
So interesting that you say that there's only one playoff team, which would mean that either the Giants, who we just talked about, would be a playoff team, or it'd be the Phillies, it seems like, with the way the race is looking. And I mean, in the NL East, it's kind of just looking like a dogfight in general. The Braves have really gained some ground, where we saw the Mets pulling away a little bit early. It's now separated by only a game and a half. So the defending champs, I mean, they're hitting their stride right now. They're winning games that they're supposed to, and I mean, they're only a game and a half back. So that division is going to be fun to watch down the stretch. But the Phillies now sit in a playoff spot, and we had a discussion episode that you can go watch. It's on our channel. It'll be linked on one of these sides. But we talked about, after Bryce Harper's injury, with what do they do now? And it's kind of, he left him as a team that was maybe their ceiling was a wild card we were looking at. But now that they lost Harper, we're thinking, and lost their manager, we were thinking, well, are they even a playoff contender now? But now they sit in a playoff spot, and what we came to is maybe they make a move now. Andrew Benintendi was one I mentioned, and but they kind of need to focus on retooling for the future. But now they're in a playoff spot, and like you said, the Cardinals are kind of slipping, and the Giants are cold as well. They kind of look to, at least for now, have control over that third playoff spot. So should the Phillies go all in? I
think, well, like we mentioned, I don't think there really is any all in this trade deadline, because I don't think there are guys that push the needle, fully across the spectrum. But you mentioned in the TikTok Benintendi maybe going after a David Bednar from the Pirates to give them a closer who could lock it down, who not only can lock it down for one inning, but has the most 2-inning saves in the majors. That could be a good move for the Phillies. I still don't think that the Phillies are that good of a team, but with the way the NL is shaking out right now, I think they should run with the spot they're in right now. I think they were kind of left for dead once Girardi was fired, and they're still chugging along, 46-40. They haven't hit a huge falling point with Harper going down with injury. They're 7-3 in their last 10. I think they should keep riding the wave at least. Not saying sell the farm system to try and go out and get one of those trade deadline pieces, but if they can make some moves, add to the bullpen like we mentioned, and kind of just keep trying to maintain their position right now, I think that would be a good move for them. And then you see if you can make a little bit of noise in the playoffs. With Wheeler and Nola on your team, that gives you a chance to win the first 2 games of a series because they match up with really any 1-2 pitching matchup in the National League. So I think there's a chance, but I'm not saying go all in, but maybe ride the wave a little bit. We can also talk about the Marlins too, because they're only a couple games back of the Giants, who are only a couple games back of the Phillies and the Cardinals. Maybe the Marlins in it as well. Do you agree or no?
I think the NL is just a little too crowded there for the Marlins to be in it. They're 4 games back, whereas the Giants and Cardinals are only separated by 1 and 2. And Giants 2, Cardinals 1. So I don't know, having to face the Braves and Mets more, if the Marlins will be able to make up that ground while they're kind of making it up because of struggling teams here. But I think with the Phillies, I think based off their track record in years past, I'll say, I think a playoff berth, and I mean, like you said, Wheeler Nola 1-2, that can maybe win them a 3-game wild card series, which is starting this year. So I think if the Phillies are able to sneak into the playoffs with a wild card spot, and then win the wild card series and get into the NLDS, I think that's a huge success for a team that struggled recently. And yeah, I don't think their roster as a whole is that good and not a World Series contender by any means. But I think if they get into the NLDS, that'll be considered a success. And I think if you make a move at the deadline to help give you a bullpen arm or a good glove like Benintendi, who also has a good elite bat. So I think that's a move that they should make, and I think that'll help them potentially get into the NLDS, which would be a success.
Yeah, let's focus on the top of this division real quick before we move on to the American League. The Braves, 1.5 games back of the Mets. This is probably the one division that we differed on the most preseason when it came to our predictions. You doubled down on it, I think, later in the year, where I had the Mets winning, you have the Braves winning. We stuck with it even though the Braves were struggling early on in the year, and now they've come roaring back 52-35 to the Mets 53-33. What are you thinking? Are you sticking with the Braves in the top of that division? Because I think I'm going to stick with the Mets just to keep it continuous. I want to believe in my preseason prediction.
It's hard. I mean, the Mets, Scherzer's coming back now. He's only made 1, maybe 2 starts since coming back. And DeGrom's starting his rehab, so he's coming back soon. So it's going to be hard once they get a completely healthy Scherzer and then DeGrom back, it was like, he's the best pitcher in Major League Baseball when he's healthy. So, it's going to be hard to go against the Mets. But, the Braves, they've played well, and you got to hand it to them. They just won championship. Acuna's playing well. Fried, like we mentioned, he's an all-star. So, it's very tough. If I have to pick right now, I think I'm going to go the Mets just because of the help that they have. And beginning of the year when the Braves, I still thought the Braves were in it, but I was kind of leaning a little bit towards maybe the Mets. And now that Scherzer's back, DeGrom's coming back, you talked about Wheeler and Nola, but I'm taking Scherzer and DeGrom as DeGrom and Scherzer rather as a 1-2, kind of 1A, 1B almost, as a better 1-2 punch and the best 1-2 punch available, maybe both top 5 pitchers in baseball. So it's hard to pick against that. Yeah,
that's going to be the Mets' big trade deadline acquisition is getting Jacob DeGrom back. please, I hope he stays healthy for the stretch of the year. It seems like we haven't had a long stretch of him being healthy. Every time he comes back, he gets injured again. So really, fingers crossed he stays healthy, because he's a league changer when he's out there. So I hope that the Mets can have him down the home stretch, make the NL East even a little bit more interesting, because I think right now it's probably, outside of the AL East, the most polarizing division in baseball. Let's go to the American League, start in the AL West. The Astros, the second best team in the American League in my mind. They're 56-29 in sole possession of the number one spot in the West. Doesn't look like they're going to give it up anytime soon, but a team that's come roaring back, who we absolutely left for dead. The Seattle Mariners, now 45-42, and they hold a spot. They're tied, but they're holding a wild card spot in the American League. After, I think we wrote them off and saying they're not contenders at all. They're already out early in the season. They've come roaring back. The Rangers are also playing better baseball, 39-44, and the Los Angeles Angels have the same amount of wins as the Rockies and Diamondbacks. They're 38-49, 19 games back in the West in fourth place. They're still 9 games ahead of the Oakland A's, who are 29-58, but there's 3 teams that stick out to me in this division. It's the Astros. We know who they are. They're number 1. They're going to stay there. They're going to win this division. Probably be the second best team in the American League to the Yankees. But then the then the Mariners, who have come roaring back, and the Angels, who have fallen off probably the biggest cliff on planet Earth.
I want to start with the Astros here, because we both had them still winning this division at the beginning of the season, but we expected them to be kind of the worst division winner among the American League. I think we had the White Sox as the best team in the AL, and then the Blue Jays close behind. And then the Astros still winning the division, but I mean, we thought they'd be challenged by the Mariners and the Angels, but I mean, the Astros have proven us wrong. They've played wonderful baseball this year, and I mean, Astros, can't count them out. That they've kind of been running baseball, whether we like it or not, for the last 5 years or so now. And I mean, with the Angels, it's so painful to watch. I was watching the Angels-Orioles game yesterday. It was a Sunday morning game, and they had a stretch where it was first and second, I think 1 out. They give up a double, so it run scores. It's now second and third, 1 out, and they go pass ball wild pitch to score 2 runs on back-to-back pitches. It's just a hard baseball to watch. The pitching has been their struggle, like we saw. Syndergaard's been good, but not an ace, which they wanted him to be. And I mean, Shohei's been great. Mike Trout's been great. Taylor Ward's been good, but that's about it, looking down the team. And you hear rumors every year, should the Angels trade Mike Trout? They're not going to, they've already said. But, I mean, at what point? It'll be hard to trade that contract anyway, but it's Mike Trout, so I'm sure they'll find a suitor. But at what point do you say, yeah, this isn't going to work out, let's get some prospects for him and work for the future? So, I mean, the Angels, they're just... I think this year has taught me, don't pick the Angels. I'd rather be proved wrong with them being good than proved wrong them being bad again. So, I mean, yeah, but getting out of that, the Rangers and Mariners are two teams that are playing well. Mariners are playing like we thought they could at the beginning of the year. But, I mean, towards the midpoint of this first half, we did not think they would be in this position. Like you said, we left them for dead, and now they're 16-4 in their last 20, 9-1 in the last 10, and have won 8 straight, fresh off a 4-game sweep of the Blue Jays. So, I mean, do you think that the Mariners can end this playoff drought?
That's a tough one, because I really want to celebrate what the Mariners have been doing. That being said, I'm not sure there's room for them in the American League playoffs. I really hope that they can make it, because they've got a budding star in Julio Rodriguez. We're going to call him a friend of the show because he's seen our Instagram post, which was pretty cool. But he's been one of the best players in baseball this season. Not rookies, just best players in general. He's a future star. Like, he's absolutely going to, in my opinion, win an MVP one day. Maybe not this year, but in the future. He's right now the front runner for American League Rookie of the Year, and he's put that team on his back. He's been a young leader. They've got other guys making contributions. We've mentioned Ty France, who's back from injury now. Logan Gilbert's been pitching well, but the rest of that team, it's kind of a patchwork squad, and it's putting together a lot of wins like we saw them do last year. It's very reminiscent of that team down the stretch, when Mitch Haniger was walking games off, and they had Ty France, and they had all those other guys just putting together good, solid games and winning ball games. They just came up a little bit short. They added that extra spot in the American League, so Mariners fans a little bit more hopeful about this year. It would be interesting if they can sneak in over a team like Toronto or Tampa Bay, who right now they're tied with Toronto for that last wild card spot. Tampa Bay, who we'll get to in a little bit, 45-40, a couple games ahead of the Mariners. It's tough. I'm not sure there's room for them in the American League, but I really want to see them make it and end that playoff drought. If I had to make a prediction, though, right now, we're going to get to the rest of the American League. I don't think it happens for the Mariners, but I've been proven wrong on them before. I didn't think they'd be in this position. I didn't think they'd be in possession of a wild card spot at any point in the year after the slow start that we saw from them. So I've been proven wrong once. I could be proven wrong again. We'll just have to see.
I'm in agreement with you. I think this, spoiler alert, I think this is still the 4 AL East teams, the 3 after the Yankees, holding the wild card spots at the end of the year. But I think the biggest head scratcher for me in this division is the Rangers. There's reports that they're going to be buyers at the deadline, and one of those pieces that they might buy is their old friend Joey Gallo from the Yankees, who the Yankees have been actively shopping him, the reports say, and the Rangers are one of the potential suitors. And this Rangers team that's 4 spots back and 4 games back of the wild card, 3-7 in the last 10. It's not like they're streaking in on a hot streak and kind of closing the gap there. The gap's getting larger for them, and now they sit 3rd in the division, and will have to play the Mariners and the Astros more down the stretch. That's a head scratcher for me. I think the Rangers should not be buyers at this deadline.Maybe not sellers either, but I don't think they should be selling farm to try and make a playoff push when I think they're going to finish multiple spots back.
I think when we hear that the Rangers are going to be buyers, it's not what we normally think. I think they're going to be buyers for the future. I think they're looking at guys who aren't rentals for this year. They want players with 1 or 2 more years on their contract that they're going to have time to gel for the second half of this year with the other core of pieces that they went out and bought. John Gray, Cole Calhoun, and then obviously Marcus Semien and Corey Seager. I think they want the team to gel over the rest of the second half and then buying guys that have more years on their contract to come in next year, hit the ground running, have a little bit more experience than some other teams going into the year, and then hope that it all works out. We've seen that this ownership is willing to spend money with those 2 massive contracts they gave out to Seager and Semien, and I think when we hear they want to buy, it's not because they want to push for a playoff spot, because, if they're running an MLB franchise, they're not that stupid to think that they can make the playoffs behind all those teams in the American League. But I think that they're going to want to buy pieces that have a couple more years on their deals so that then they can compete maybe a little bit more than normal for the second half and then come back next year and be a more formidable opponent with a little bit more experience under their belt than some other teams in the American League.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a horrible decision for the Rangers, and I think I think a similar built team to the Angels in that they need pitching, and they've got John Gray, like you mentioned. Martin Perez, who's an all-star, has been amazing this year, kind of unexpectedly. So I think that's the big piece. Get a few more bats in there. So I don't think they should make a playoff push. If they were to be big buyers, that I don't think that'd be smart. At least what I think. But yeah, moving into the AL Central, it's kind of similar to the NL Central, kind of business as usual, not as we thought at the beginning of the season, but as it's been looking throughout this whole season so far. Twins still lead the division by 4.5 games at 48-40 over the Cleveland Guardians, who are 41-42. They've been struggling a little bit. Jose Ramirez hasn't been what he has been so far this season, still been great, an all-star, but they're 2-8 in their last 10. The White Sox are only a half game back of that, 5 games back in the division total, 41-43. And then the Tigers and Royals at the bottom of the division, Tigers at 36-49, 10.5 back. And the Royals, who I think, no, they're not the worst team in baseball anymore, but they're one of them, 32-52, 14 games back.
Yeah, this is the Twins leading the division, and then the Guardians and the White Sox vying to try and take that top spot. The White Sox have crept up a little bit more, but they're still behind. The Twins have led this division pretty much the whole way. We had that stint where the Guardians were on top. They've fallen off a little bit. They're under 500 now, but the White Sox inching ever closer to 500. I mentioned they swept my Giants. They've been playing a little bit better baseball as of late, but right now, I mean, it's the Twins division. They're one of those two teams going to have to take it from them. We'll see down the stretch. We've both been high on the White Sox going into the year. We want them to make it work. Tim Anderson back from injury. They're getting Lance Lynn back. He's kind of regaining form a little bit still, shaking off that injury. Lucas Giolito's been struggling, but he's getting back on his regular train. Right now, I think the White Sox are probably the better team than the Guardians, but it's the Twins division right now. I guess we'll check in the next standings update, but this has been how this division's been going just about all year.
I think this is still the White Sox division to take, and I think they will take it. The Twins have been leading it all year, but I still have faith in the White Sox. I truly do. I think they will make a push, and I think at the end of the year, I think it'll be a dogfight, but I think I'm still taking the White Sox to win the division.
Let's move on to the American League East. You know who's at the top. It's the New York Yankees, 61-25, a .709 win percentage. They've yet to lose 10 games at home. They're 34-9 at home. But then second place in the division, I think it would be shocking if you told this to us about a month and a half ago. The Red Sox, 47-39. They just split a 4-game series with the Yankees, including a comeback victory on Sunday Night Baseball to even out that series at 2-2. Then in third place, it's the Tampa Bay Rays. And then falling a little bit, the Toronto Blue Jays at 45-42. The Red Sox were 47-39. The Rays 47-40. So right now, Boston 14 games back of New York. Tampa Bay 15.5 back. Toronto 16.5 back. And then how about those Baltimore Orioles, 18.5 back. That sounds like a huge number, like what we normally see from the Orioles, but they're one game under 500, and they're only 2 games back of the Toronto Blue Jays, who we had as the division winner coming into the year. We mentioned last month the Orioles were my surprise of the month, but they've continued to win 8 straight. They're 8-2 in their last 10, and they're a couple games out of a playoff spot. How about them Orioles?
I mean, it's crazy to see. I mean, they just swept the Angels. We mentioned the Angels, but I mean, this is a team they have the 5th lowest bullpen ERA in Major League Baseball, and I think that's the big thing. The bats are coming alive. Adley is finding his footing in Major League Baseball. Austin Hayes has been solid. Cedric Mullins is doing better. Kind of a slower start than what we saw from him last season, but he's doing better now. And Trey Mancini is still producing. So, I mean, this is a team that, like, it doesn't have the star-studded lineup or, like, even, like, a team, like, a more veteran team that you know names of. This is a team, like, who are these guys that are performing for them? And, I mean, they're performing, though. I mean, like I mentioned, the bullpen's been key. That's their all-star Jorge Lopez, who's been great this year. And I mean, watch out for the Orioles. I mean, I think their window is still a few years. We look at it, but I mean, maybe you push that up a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not saying the Orioles are a playoff team, but I will bump up my expectations and say they should speed up their rebuild now that they've seen the recent success that they've had. Maybe they go out and they do what the Rangers, I think, are going to do and buy pieces that can play for them in the future as well and kind of gel this season and then trying to come out in the AL East and bang some heads around next year. But I think this is a team that should make a push, not a playoff push, but a push to be better quicker, because we've seen that they can. And I think that's probably higher. They're playing better than they expected to this year. And they're playing better than everyone expected them to this year. They've got guys in the farm system, Grayson Rodriguez, a lot of other names as well, that I think they should speed up their rebuild and maybe attempt to be a contender sooner than they expected to, because they're almost at 500 halfway into the season. That's much better than we all thought.
Yeah, the AL East as a whole, we predicted at the beginning of the year. I think both of us had that. You might have had the Mariners in there at the beginning of the season, but we had 4 teams. I had 4 teams in the American League East making the playoffs, and You might have as well. Otherwise, two of them and one just missing out. But I mean, do you think this is still the case? I mean, see the Mariners, potentially even the Orioles are. I mean, they're only 2 games back, so it's not outlandish to say that they could be one of those 4 teams making the playoffs and one of the 3 wildcard teams. So I mean, you still think 4 teams from the AL East are playoff teams?
Contrary to my previous belief earlier in the season, the Red Sox, I think, are for sure going to be a playoff team. And that's just crazy to me considering how terribly they started. I think the Red Sox are going to be that one of those 3 wildcard teams. I mean, right now, I think we can confidently say the Yankees win the AL East and the Astros win the AL West. They're going to be seeds 1 and 2. I think that's pretty. We can pretty confidently say that. That third division still up for grabs, but probably only one playoff team from that division. It's either going to be the Twins, the White Sox, or the Guardians. Right now, say the Twins are the winners. Red Sox get one of those 3 playoff spots, and then it's the next 2. It could be Rays, Blue Jays. It could be Rays and Mariners. It could be Blue Jays and even Orioles, or maybe the Guardians or the White Sox do sneak in there, but it's hard to say that a team like the Mariners or the Orioles, who we've seen be bad for so long, are going to take the spot of a Blue Jays or the Rays. I'd love to see it happen. And the Orioles in the playoffs would be fantastic. The Mariners in the playoffs would be the best narrative, I think, that you could think of going into that playoffs. However, I'll stick with the safe answer. Say Boston and then Tampa Bay and then Toronto make the playoffs, but they're going to be pushed a little bit more from teams that we didn't expect a little bit, even a month or 2 ago.
I'm still taking those 3 AL East teams behind the Yankees to be playoff teams as well. I think if one of them is unseeded, it'll be because of the Mariners. Don't think it'll be the Orioles. Don't think it'll be the Guardians. There's a chance it's the second place team between White Sox, Twins, but I think it's still those 3 teams, kind of wild card spot to lose, I guess you could say. And at these the Blue Jays have been played horribly. They've played 1-9 in their last 10, which is god awful, and they still hold a playoff position. I don't think that's gonna stay for long, and I think these are still 3 playoff teams. And if I had to make a choice right now.
Yeah, and I think you look in the National League, one of those wildcard spots already held. It's going to be one of Braves and Mets, probably the number 1 wildcard team. And then right now, I'd say there's 4 more teams vying for 2 more spots. You've got the Padres, the Phillies, the Cardinals, and then the Giants. Right now, Padres 2.5 games up on the Phillies. The Phillies hold the 3rd wildcard spot, and then the Cardinals are 1 game back. The Giants are 2 games back. If you want to throw the Marlins in there, they're 4 games back, but I think, as we mentioned, we don't think they're going to compete like those other teams are. But who do you think of those 5 teams? We go Braves/Mets, Padres, Phillies, Cardinals/Brewers, and Giants, where the line's going to be drawn for you in the wild card.
I think the 2 teams of those 4 that you mentioned that are going to be left out are the Giants and the Phillies. I still think it'll still be the Cardinals as the second place team in the NL Central, behind I think the Brewers still win, and I think the Padres at least for now have it, with Tatis coming back soon, and Braves and Mets obviously the second place team being there. So I think those are my 3 teams in the National League. So but I do think those will be separated by only a few games come the end of the season.
Yeah, well, I mean, this has been one of our more wilder standings updates, considering that we've had 2 teams come from the depths of hell in the Orioles and the Mariners to rise up. The Angels just taking that catastrophic fall, and then the NL West probably more separated than we've seen it all year. Anything else that you want to talk about before we wrap it up?
That kind of wraps it up for me. I mean, yeah, wild standing update, and going into the All-Star break, it's exciting to see what's going to happen in the second half.
Yeah, well, that's all we've got for you guys today. Let us know what you thought of the All-Star rosters, as well as what you thought about what we recently talked about being the standings update. We'll be back later this week. We're going to eventually do a first half review. Then Ryan goes to the All-Star game. I'm sure he's going to enjoy that a ton. But that's all we've got for you guys today. Thank you guys for listening to the Double Play Podcast or watching it on YouTube. Wherever you are, please consider following or subscribing to the show, leaving a like or a 5-star review if you're listening on podcast platforms. Anywhere that you're watching, you can go down to the description, find all of our social media channels active on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. You know the deal. But I've been Jack Smith. He's Ryan Donahue. We've been the Double Play Podcast. We'll see you guys next time. I like the hand motions.
Yep. See ya.